Is the Mythic GM Emulator by Tana Pigeon worth trying out? Yes, and in this video I'll be going through it to show you why. First of all, what is a GM emulator? A GM emulator is a set of rules and systems that replaces the traditional Gamemaster in a tabletop RPG. GM emulators allow you to play a tabletop RPG either by yourself or with a group of friends, but with none of you being the Gamemaster. In this video we are talking about the Mythic Gamemaster emulator. Now it's worth pointing out that the Mythic Gamemaster emulator is not a tabletop RPG system in itself. You can use the Mythic GM emulator to play your favorite tabletop RPG. You can use the emulator to play these RPGs either by yourself or with a group of friends, but with none of you having to be the Game Master. And lastly, you can use the GM emulator to just write a book as well. It works for that too. So how do you begin? You can create an entire world with Mythic, but I like to start with a world already sort of made and a basic premise. Let's say for the premise of this that a princess has been kidnapped by a dragon and a knight has been sent by the king to go and rescue her. With Mythic, the first thing you have to do is create 3 lists of things. The first are a list of NPCs. These are non-player characters in your adventure that you have to either be friends with or oppose. And these can also be organizations in the world. So for our premise, the NPCs we start out with are the king, the princess, the dragon. The second list are threads, or plot threads, or storylines. These are sort of plot threads that are running through our adventure that we can follow and try to accomplish and finish. These can also be quests that we have to go on. In this premise, one thread would be saving the princess from the dragon. But I could also add a second thread sort of in the background, which is that the king distrusts the prince and thinks the prince is more popular than him. The last thing we keep track of isn't really a list, but it's something called the chaos factor. The chaos factor is something we'll get into in more detail later on, but it's very fun. For now, just know that it's a number from 1 to 9 that measures how in control of the story your characters are. At the beginning, it starts at 5. To play this adventure, you will sort of play using scenes. Now think of scenes as how they would be in a film. A film is a collection of scenes. Scenes are just moments in time that your character is doing something to further the plot. So one scene, for example, could be Batman trying to create an antidote for one of Scarecrow's venoms. It could also be Tom Cruise and his friends trying to make it to the other end of a corridor with a hologram in Mission Impossible. They're just important moments of time that are important to the story so that we don't have to follow every little thing your character does. So our first scene would be the knight heading off into the woods to track down the dragon and save the princess. Now scenes can be either altered or interrupted. At the start of every scene, we'll roll a d10. If we roll lower than or equal to our chaos factor, then that means the scene is either altered or interrupted. On an odd number, it's altered. On an even number, it's interrupted. When a scene is altered, all that means is that something is different about the scene than we previously thought. If our knight was going into the woods and the scene was altered and it was a sunny day, maybe this time the scene will be in a stormy day. An interrupt scene just means that before this scene happens, there will be another scene that happens before. So for example, before our knight goes into the woods, he could be interrupted by another scene which is being ambushed by bandits. To help us decide exactly what this means, we have 2 tables that we can roll on. One of these tables is the event focus table, and you will use the event focus table when you get a scene interrupted. These are just things to help you decide what happens in the story. So for example, if you roll a percentile dice and you get NPC action, that means that in that interrupted scene, one of your NPCs will be doing something. If you get player character negative, then the interrupt scene will be something bad happening to your character. After we roll on the event focus table, we can then move on to the action and theme table. The action and theme table is just something to give us some inspiration for what is going on. we'll roll on the action table and we'll roll on the theme table and take both of those together. So for example, if I rolled on the event focus table PC negative and on the action theme table I rolled take wounds, that means the interrupt scene could be something that gives us some wounds, like an ambush by bandits. However, if I rolled NPC negative and then I rolled on the table and got the king and I rolled take wounds, the interrupt scene could be before the knight goes into the woods. There's a lot of celebration for how brave he is, and in that instance it's bad for the king. Because we have that storyline of the king distrusting the prince, the king takes some wound to his pride because his people love the knight more than him. The process for an altered scene is exactly the same. The only thing is you wouldn't use the event focus table. You just roll on the action and theme table. If I rolled take wounds on the action and theme table, then I could just say that the knight went into the woods and there was a hailstorm that caused some damage. The important thing to remember with all these tables is to just go with the first thing that comes to mind. If nothing comes to mind, just ignore it and just move on with the story. You can kind of see why the chaos factor is sort of interesting and important in this stage. The higher your chaos factor is, the more scenes will be altered and the more interrupts you will get, potentially in a negative way. As your characters become more and more out of control of the story, the various other factions of the world, the antagonists, the world, etc., will start doing more and more things to your character rather than your character actually being in control of the situation and accomplishing their goal. The next thing we have is the fate chart, and this is how you will actually play out your scene after you've rolled to see whether it was altered or interrupted. Now, this fate chart looks very complicated, but I promise you, it's actually very simple to use. So let's take a question you may have for your Game Master. Is this door locked? The first thing you will do is decide how likely it is the answer to the question will be a yes. Don't think too long on this, just go with your gut and what makes sense. If this is the door to a rickety apartment in a post-war abandoned apocalypse, then the chance that the door will be locked is unlikely. If this is the door to a police station, very likely it is locked. For our example door, let's just say that it's 50-50. Next, at the bottom, you would go to the chaos factor or rank. That means we end up at this box. This box is telling you the percentages if you roll a D100 or 2D10s. As you can see, in this box, there's a 50% chance of a yes answer and it looks like 49% chance of a no answer. But it's pretty much 50-50. 0 to 10 is an extreme yes. 10 to 50 is a yes. 50 to 91 is a no, and 91 to 100 is an extreme no. An extreme yes could be the door is locked, but you can also hear a guard on the other side of it. An extreme no could be that the key is actually in the lock, so you could steal the key as well as walk into the door. As you go from impossible to has to be on the odds, you can see that the chance of a yes answer increases. Similarly, the chance of a yes answer increases if the chaos factor goes up, meaning, again, the higher the chaos factor, the higher the chances are that if you ask the Game Master if there are monsters on the other side of the door, there will be monsters on the other side of the door. And that's how things go. You will basically just ask questions about the world as you explore it, and whenever an obstacle comes up, such as having to pick the lock, you will use the game system you have chosen to do that. So you would roll a thievery skill check in this case if you were using Dungeons & Dragons. The last thing about the fate chart is that if you roll a doubles on the dice, and that is lower than or equal to your chaos factor, so for example 44 if our chaos factor is 5, then a random event happens. And the random event is just an interrupt scene, except instead of happening at the start of the scene, it happens right then and right now, and you can follow the exact same process. One thing I want to talk about is that you don't have to roll for every single thing. A lot of people get bogged down by rolling for all sorts of stuff. The important thing to remember is just use logic and your own creativity and roll for the important things that you're genuinely interested in. You don't have to roll for, is this house a 2-story house or is this house underground? Just use your imagination and creativity. Remember, the Mythic GM Emulator rules are there to help you tell a story. You aren't beholden to them. Don't use them to a fault, and if you find that they are stopping you from telling the story you want to tell, you can just ignore them. Finally, at the end of a scene, you will update your lists. If you met new NPCs, or some NPCs with you are no longer present, then you would remove them from your list. If you solved a mystery or ended a plotline or storyline, you can cross it off the threads list, and if you discovered something else, you can add it to the thread list. And finally, the chaos factor. If your characters were heroic in the scene, and they achieved something, and they, succeeded in something, and they moved forward, the chaos factor goes down as they take control of the story. If they were defeated very badly, if lots of things happened, if the villain got what they wanted, or got something that they wanted, then the chaos factor goes up as your characters start to lose control of the situation and the other factions and other powers start doing their own thing to mess with your characters. And that's kind of it. You will introduce a scene, you will roll for whether it's altered or interrupted, and then you'll play it out by asking the GM Emulator questions that will lead on to more questions. If any obstacles come in your way, you will use the rules in your system. Is the door locked? If the answer is yes, you can either try picking the lock using the rules of your RPG system. You can ask the GM Emulator, is there a side entrance after your character goes to look at it? And then at the end of the scene, update your NPC list, update your plot threads, update your chaos factor, carry on to the next scene, and at the end, you will have a collection of scenes that make up your story. As I said before, the Mythic GM Emulator is a great way of playing a solo RPG. But if you want your emulation rules to be in an RPG system itself, then I think that Iron Swan is for you. If you enjoyed this video, critically hit that like button and comment down below your thoughts on your adventures with the Mythic GM Emulator.